Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Hi. That was excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pat Berman. I am a professor of art history here at Wellesley, and I have the great honor of welcoming you to the opening events of the inauguration of Dr. Paula A. Johnson as the 14th president of Wellesley College. It's also my distinct honor to ask all of you to please silence your cell phones. Thank you. It has been a real pleasure to co-chair the planning for President Johnson's inauguration with Ellen Goldberg-Luger. She's an alumna and a trustee of our institution. And before proceeding, Ellen and I really would like to thank the members of the entire inauguration committee, whose names are going to be in tomorrow's inauguration program. It's been a hardworking and phenomenal partnership. We also want to thank Jarlath Waldron and David Tolan for today's symposium. You have worked phenomenally to make this happen. Ellen and I first spoke with President Johnson last spring about the wishes she had for her inauguration. And we'll give it back to her. And I refer here to my notes from that meeting. Paula Johnson was emphatic that the inauguration should celebrate the vibrancy of a liberal arts community. She asked that the students be front and center, that a focal point should be faculty scholarship and creativity, and that all of us, staff, union, students, alumni, trustees, and faculty should come together throughout these 2 days of celebration, that we intersect. Recognizing that the liberal arts are under pressure throughout the wider culture, and particularly the distinctive qualities of a women's liberal arts community, President Johnson was specific in her requests. She envisioned a faculty symposium that would celebrate both disciplinary specificity and interdisciplinary collaboration. As we spoke, she identified two central concerns to our community. The first is the question of feminism today, and the second is about preparing our students to encounter problems and challenges that we cannot yet even envision. Consequently, today's symposium is organized around the theme of intersections. The first panel, Creating New Futures, embodies President Johnson's manifest wish not just to name problems, but to offer strategies for resolving or solving them. The second panel, Feminisms Across Time and Space, explores the historical and global dimensions of women's and men's efforts toward equity, mirroring President Johnson's charge to examine what feminism means in today's Wellesley community and what it has meant historically. I have, as an aside, been the proud recipient of emails from some of you reminding me gently that I may have had a typo in today's program because you reminded me that feminisms should read as feminism, and I appreciate the emails. But it's precisely the plural form of both future and feminism that we emphasize here today in order to make manifest often overlooked identities and practices, what the legal scholar and activist Kimberly Williams Crenshaw has termed intersectionality. And we'll hear more about that later today, the multiple voices that come together. Our process was as follows. We set a call for papers to the entire faculty, and a selection committee was constituted to grapple with the difficult task of choosing today's speakers, and many of them are actually sitting here in the auditorium. Our committee received excellent proposals from around the campus, and you can see the names of the selection committee on the final page of our handout today. And I express the desire on behalf of the entire committee to have been able to include many more voices in today's symposium. For example, after our committee made its selections, we noted with some chagrin that there were no men included today. So please accept this full-throated apology as well as a plea for future panels of this type. I know that I speak for the entire faculty when I say that such multidisciplinary gatherings always yield productive discussion. Each of us has one foot in the classroom and one foot in the worlds of science, politics, the arts, technology, and other arenas in which we contribute to global discussions and transformation. Today, we celebrate that bridge that our faculty builds between the classroom and the larger world. I only have two final things to say, and one is prosaic, and the other's poetic. First, the prosaic. Each of the two panels that you'll hear is going to be followed by a question and answer session, and to that end, we're setting up microphones at the bottom of these two aisles, and if you have questions or comments, we'd ask that you come up. There will be a 15-minute break between the two panels so that you can refresh yourselves. And then at the end of the afternoon, everyone is welcome to come to the Alumni Hall ballroom downstairs for a reception. And now for the poetic. President Johnson appealed to art, music, dance, and poetry when first envisioning her inauguration. As a way of honoring that wish, the poet, social activist, and professor of Spanish, Marjorie Agosin, has written a poem to initiate the two-day celebration. I would like to invite Professor Agosin to the podium and then to open the symposium. This is for you, President Johnson. Thank you so much.
I should just do that. Yes. Thank you. It is a great honor for me to be here and speak of poetry and about poetry at the inauguration of President Johnson. I'm also very honored to be among my colleagues, even though they're all women now, at Wellesley College, whose creativity and scholarship illuminates the lives of our communities and beyond. I also want to thank everyone involved in all the efforts to make this inauguration an extraordinary event, and especially to Pat Berman and to Jarlath Walter. I believe that poetry allows us to create the possibility of thinking of a new world. Poetry allows us to engage with beauty and justice, and to imagine a world where trust and empathy become real. Poetry is a lighthouse into our souls, and all living things search for the light. I will be reading a poem, a very long poem, so excuse me. It's called Justice, a poem originally written in my native language, Spanish, but I have to say that much has been gained in its translation. And the translator is Professor Celeste Kostopoulos-Cooperman from Suffolk University. Please join me in the reflections about justice, which is ultimately love. And this poem is for Paula Johnson. I will read you just a very few verses in Spanish, so you will hear the rhythm of its original language. Salmo 10. La misericordia y la verdad se encontraron. La justicia y la paz se besaron. La ferocidad del invierno aún no llegaba a las ciudades. Aún el otoño y sus colores como un girasol gobernaban el cielo. Parejas jugaban entre las hojas. Los enamorados soñaban con la luz de los ríos y el amor era como una textura de aguas. Psalm 85. Compassion and truth met. Peace and justice kissed. The ferocity of winter had not yet arrived to the cities. Like a sunflower, the fall with its colors still ruled the sky. Couples played among the leaves, while lovers dreamed about luminous rivers and love was like the texture of water. There was so much light in that city, beloved by all. Some children climbed among the trees, wanting to collect stars, but suddenly upheaval gripped the streets. Death arrived at the most unexpected places, at a bar where people used to offer a toast to the city of light, at a concert hall where a piano shattered into 1,000 pieces like abandoned bodies. It was in Paris and in Istanbul, in New York City, and in a neighborhood in Kabul. They were everywhere, and we were everyone. The upheaval also erupted in a marketplace in Beirut, where women carried children and sweet dry fruit, and where pomegranates appeased faith. The words fell silent, throats dried up, pianos split open in a heartbreaking wail. Language became vulnerable. We didn't know how to name them, the ones who were thirsty for death, lost and without a compass. The upheaval was not only there, it was felt in the world, in houses big and small. The sky cried ashes of tears. The meadows were drenched in a fall sunlight and were blanketed by black clouds that eclipsed the earth. A young girl's head was cut off. She could have been Dalila. She could have been Marie, and her hair fell among the leaves in the parks of Paris. It fell in the markets of Beirut, looking like a ring of fire. And the sky ceased being the sky. The heavens became a shawl of tears, a howl, the scale of a sobbing universe. And we wonder if this was our world, or if perhaps it was another, if it was the other way around, or if we had entered the most evil zones where words are bereft of meaning. And suddenly everyone was immersed in the deepest silence, only death among the streets, among the boulevards, among the Corniche of Alexandria and the narrow streets of Tunisia. Death carried banners from so much bloodthirsty killing. It had only lost its breath and voice. Death became entangled in itself and fell in its own trap, the void of senseless pain, the carnival of deranged blood. Death feared itself. The earth also decided to swallow it. Look at the black cloud dancing in the world. Look at the black cloud. And where was justice? Had it gone away? Had it moved to another place? Where was the woman who carried the tablet of hope? Where was the noble goddess of bountiful generosity, the woman who appeared in dark nights to guide lost travelers? And we ask ourselves if there will be a lighthouse to give us shelter, a place, a country, a city, a forest. The world suddenly fell silent. The universe stopped singing. The crickets, the wind, the waves stopped chattering, stopped being. Did we have to begin to name it again? How would we be different from the past? Suddenly, justice returned. She appeared radiant and beautiful. She had fallen asleep, like all of us, ingenuous and sometimes comfortable, innocent and other times arrogant. In her innocence, she also feared not being able to be as before. Justice spoke and said, "There will be no vengeance or hatred, nor will there be oblivion. We will return to play in the no longer abandoned parks. We will dance again in the hills of our cities. We will go joyfully to the markets, and our baskets will be filled with offerings. Barbarism will be transformed into beauty. Justice will dress in strands as golden as the sun. Children will not kill other children. The children will play on seesaws, on swings, and with the stars. And justice will be made with words that will be words again." Justice disappeared within the foliage, and suddenly the children appeared, jumping on the leaves, and a young girl said that she liked to count the stars. Another invited us to her home by the sea. because the lighthouses had returned, and the wise old women told stories on the rocks. It seemed like the world had turned around. It had returned to its place. We decided to remain on the side of beauty, to confide in the night and the day. We decided to touch the light and attend the concerts of the water and the earth, and imagine cellos like deep forests and pianos like a cascade of living water. We chose life and the path of the possible. Not to be afraid to live among those different from ourselves. Justice suddenly appeared again, without the weights she had carried before. She seemed like a floating bride, like a fairy predicting good signs. Justice smiled, saying that this was to be the road. We will achieve more when there is no more hatred or fear, when oblivion makes way for luminous memory, and above all, when we will repair the fallen bodies, the voices, and the children's gaze, like a river of hope. Before departing, Justice, in all her beauty and lightness of being, said, "There will be no more hostile roads of fear. The cities will open their enormous, glorious avenues, with pedestrians walking confidently among the museums and cafes, among the concert halls and their homes, and the sky will once again be a galaxy of possible magnitudes. The children will count the stars again and draw the Milky Way." Justice promised that beauty would bathe the fields with poppies, where grenades and blood had once been, and that the rain would cleanse the universe. Justice departed without weight. She danced barefoot throughout the earth and rose towards the sky. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this very moving opening. Thank you. My name is Orit Shaer. I am Associate Professor of Computer Science and Co-Director of the Media Art and Sciences program. I'm honored to chair this faculty panel about creating new futures. Today we celebrate the ways in which the liberal arts encourages new ideas that make a difference. And while predicting the future is difficult and we might not get it right, there are some emerging global challenges that we can already foresee today. Here are some of the problems that we charge our graduates with confronting. They range from achieving accessible universal education, to combating diseases, to better understanding the brain. And it is the liberal arts education that plays an important role, an even crucial role, in tackling these complex interdisciplinary challenges. Our speakers today will present ideas for addressing some of these problems and share insights about imagining new futures. My research is in the field of human-computer interaction, a field that is at the intersection of computer science, the arts, design, and psychology. My research lab, which we see here in the picture, involves students from various disciplines in the design and implementation of new ways to interact with computers. The students in the lab develop new systems to help people of all ages to better gain insights from complex and large data sets. For example, we collaborated with biologists to create new interfaces to help for collaborative exploration of genomic data sets. We also collaborate with science and discovery museums to make complex scientific ideas accessible to a general audience through interactive play. And here in the picture, we see the large interactive surfaces that are installed in the Wellesley Human-Computer Interaction Lab that support collaborative exploration of large data sets and collective making of insights and new ideas. We are currently collaborating with the Tech Museum of Innovation in San Jose, California, and with Tufts University on a project that is funded by the National Science Foundation with the goal of reimagining the K-2 science curriculum. We aim to offer interactive educational activity that prepare children for solving real-world problems, the real-world problems of tomorrow. Our hope is to inspire the next generation of innovators. To do so, we invent new human-computer interfaces that make the invisible tangible, allowing children to interact with concepts and ideas that were traditionally considered too abstract, too complex for them to learn. More specifically in this project, we study how to design interactive experiences that allow children to engage with biology in creative new ways. So we use emerging human-computer interaction techniques such as gesture-based interaction and multi-touch interaction to create interactive experiences that are fun and age-appropriate. One design challenge that we have is how to create interactive experiences that are meaningful and playful to allow children to interact with entities that are in the nano level. And then another challenge is to let children experience meaningful interaction and a sense of accomplishment within minutes, while results from actual biological experiments might take days. I'm going to play a short video of an interactive activity called SceneFlow. We developed SceneFlow to allow children to participate in a simulation of a synthetic biology experiment, even if their school doesn't have a fully equipped research lab. So children can access and participate in scientific activities independently from what their school can afford. So the goal of SceneFlow is to engage children in a biology experiment in a playful and safe way outside of a wet laboratory setting. So we integrated this small interactive display within 3D printed casing that our students designed and then printed to connect the display together with authentic labware. And then children participate in the experiment by imitating the gestures of scientists in the lab. Here are the images of another activity that we developed that is based on research from NASA and from MIT. This activity engages children in engineering bacteria that could be helpful for a research mission on Mars. For example, children can design bacteria and then engineer the bacteria that consume soil to produce water. The pictures here are from deploying this system earlier this summer in the Boston Museum of Science. Our next steps involve continuing to work with scientists and with educators to create interactive experiences that prepare children to tackle important challenges of the future. And in the words of Alan Kay, who is a pioneer of personal computing, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. I would like to conclude by acknowledging our supporters and the researchers and the really wonderful students that work in the Wellesley Human-Computer Interaction Lab. They contribute in a significant way to every stage of our research and not only bring interdisciplinary perspectives, but also strong commitment and excitement to make a difference through the research and through the work. Thank you. I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Professor Carl Dougherty.
Good afternoon. I'm Carol Dougherty, and I'm from the Department of Classical Studies. And I'm really happy to be able to be part of today's celebration in honor of President Johnson. As a classicist who works on the distant past, it's great fun to be on a panel that's devoted to thinking about the future. By all accounts, we're suffering from a crisis of infrastructure. And if I can just get that to work and go the other way, there we go. Bridges, tunnels, water systems are all crumbling before our eyes and under our feet. And while I don't have a solution for fixing these or the problems that currently plague the T, I do want to talk about a different set of challenges. Challenges to the imagination that might equally be addressed through a renewed commitment to infrastructure. Literally what lies below the surface, infrastructure is, as anthropologist Brian Larkin explains, a set of built networks that facilitate the flow of goods, people, or ideas, and allow for their exchange over space. As physical forms, they shape the nature of a network, the speed and direction of its movement, its temporalities, and its vulnerability to breakdown. They comprise the architecture for the circulation, literally providing the undergirding of modern society. So today I want to argue that these physical structures comprise the architecture for the circulation of our thoughts, as well as for people or water. In this respect, they provide both the physical and the imaginative undergirding of our lives. And today, rather than focusing on its mechanics, I propose that we attend to the poetics of infrastructure. Both the stories we tell about those physical objects that enable the movement of people and things through space, as well as the way they help us tell those stories, how they help ideas, images, and impressions move around in our brains. So as part of today's symposium devoted to the theme of intersections, I propose a paper on the door. A very basic infrastructural element that not only enables us to move from one room to another, but also, as the French philosopher Gaston Bachelard suggests, one that can give images of hesitation, temptation, desire, security, welcome, and respect. Indeed, as Bachelard continues, if one were to give an account of all the doors one has closed and opened, of all the doors one would like to reopen, one would have to tell the story of one's entire life. While Ogden Nash claims that they are what a dog is perpetually on the wrong side of, doors, gates, pathways, and portals are fundamental to the ways that humans locate themselves in time and space as well. According to Tom Stoppard, every exit is an entrance somewhere else. And the inherent duality of the stage door, through which Rosencrantz and Guildenstern exit Hamlet's world to enter their own, is embodied by the two-faced Janus, the Roman god of the threshold. Doors help articulate what Bachelard calls a dialectic of division, inside and outside, here and there, open and shut, yes and no, a metaphorical binary that structures human experience. Indeed, it was just this kind of spatial awareness that helped unlock the world of language for Helen Keller, whose first words included door, open, and shut. Or as Jim Morrison put it when asked to explain the name of his band, there are things known and things unknown, and in between are the doors. By building, opening, and closing doors, we can both define our own limits and choose to override them. We can, as W.H. Auden says, pile our all against it when afraid, or open the door wide and choose to step outside, as Alice did, to see a wonderland that waited for her in the sunshine. For, as Auden continues in his poem, The Door, out of it steps our future. And open doors have long symbolized a sense of imaginative potential. Bachelard wonders about all the doors of mere curiosity that have tempted being for nothing, for emptiness, for an unknown that is not even imagined. Similarly, Toni Morrison associates open doors with narrative opportunity. I don't shut doors at the end of books, she says. There's a resolution of sort, but there are always possibilities, choices. In this respect, the door functions not just as an efficient architectural feature, but also as a particularly useful undergirding of the imagination. Think of the world of cozy hobbit comfort that lies behind the round green door to the Shire, or the exciting adventures in Narnia that tempt Lucy beyond the wardrobe door. The terror associated with Jack Nicholson's face bursting through the door in The Shining, or the sigh of resignation that accompanies Rhett Butler's famous last words as he strides out the door of Tara. Nora slams the door shut on patriarchy in Ibsen's The Dollhouse. Doors fly open and slam shut again with reckless hilarity in Michael Frayn's farce Noises Off. And of course, they promise endless half hours of comedy every time that Kramer bursts into Jerry's apartment. So today I want to offer a close reading of one particular door in Aeschylus's Agamemnon. The first door, in fact, to appear on the Athenian stage. Standing as it does at the intersection of myth and history, politics and gender, this door's capacity to conceal, to reveal, and ultimately to enclose once more, not only helps build a framework for imagining a new political vision for ancient Athens, but it makes possible theater's ability more generally to startle, to unsettle, to innovate. From the 5th century on, Athenians performed their dramas outdoors in the theater of Dionysus, located on the south slope of the Acropolis. Originally, the audience seated on temporary wooden benches set into the hollowed-out hillside looked out on the flat open space of the orchestra to watch the actors and chorus sing and dance. The earliest plays were performed without any stage buildings, until at some point in the middle of the century, the Athenians erected a building at the rear of the orchestra, a wooden construction with a flat roof called the skene, a word derived from the verb meaning to dwell or pitch a tent. Most scholars believe that it was Aeschylus who introduced the skene to the Athenian stage, and that he did so for the first time in the Agamemnon, the first play of the Oresteia trilogy. A brilliant example of theatrical infrastructure. The exterior of the skene was painted to represent part of the landscape, a palace, a temple, hence our word scenery. Its interior provided the actors with a place to change costumes, and the flat roof offered them an additional acting surface. The German sociologist and philosopher Georg Simmel noted that when the first human built a hut, he carved a parcel out of the infinite continuity of space and shaped this parcel into a separate whole according to one meaning. By so doing, a piece of space was unified in itself and separated from the rest of the world. In just this way, Aeschylus created something out of nothing when he built the first hut on the Athenian stage. He made a space for the invisible, enclosing it under the roof and within the 4 walls of the skene. And by giving that hut a door that opens and shuts, Aeschylus helped constitute theater as an art form that plays intensively with notions of inside and outside, with the possibilities of revelation. Just as the audience has to imagine the face behind a character's mask, it must also now think about what lies within the interior space on stage behind that closed door. On occasion, the action that takes place outside the view of the audience and inside the house can be brought back into view through that door, thanks to a stage device called the akouklema, a wheeled machine that brings interior scenes back out onto stage. A device that was designed to restore the complete vision that the skene was initially built to hide. Thus, the half-open door that's seen here on an ancient Greek vase painting serves as what Ruth Padel has called a perfect emblem of tragic feeling. It represents the tension between secrecy and revelation, the hidden and the manifest, that variously characterizes tragic texts. That door half displays what is lying in wait, both in space within the skene and in time in the still-to-be-unfolded play. Turning now to the Agamemnon, a play produced in 458 BCE, the play tells the story of the return of the Greek king Agamemnon, son of Atreus, to his palace in Mycenae after the Trojan War. During his 10-year absence, his wife Clytemnestra stayed home, nursing her anger at his decision to sacrifice their daughter Iphigenia and plotting her revenge. When Agamemnon returns with Cassandra, his war prize, in tow, Clytemnestra lures them both into the house, where she kills them in the bath. As many have noted, the play's interest in the house of Atreus is both broad and deep. It focuses not just on the domestic machinations of Clytemnestra and the current dysfunctional family dynamic, but also reaches back several generations to explore patterns of violence and revenge that have long dominated its history. By putting a house on stage, Aeschylus has literalized the metaphorical house of Atreus, and its very material presence there disrupts the familiar story, just as it interrupts the audience's previously unimpeded view of the open countryside that lies beyond the stage. In fact, after the prologue, delivered by the watchman who is lying like a dog on the roof of the house, a chorus of old men appear on the stage. hemming and hawing and repeatedly pointing to the house as they express their eagerness for their king's return and anxiety about what his wife Clytemnestra has been up to in that house during his absence. Suddenly, they turn, calling out, "You there, Clytemnestra, daughter of Tyndareus." And all eyes turn to the brand new house on stage to find Clytemnestra unexpectedly standing in its brand new doorway. This is the first entrance in Greek tragedy from the skene, from an interior space. Previously, actors made their way toward the stage, slowly walking up an entrance ramp in full view of the audience. When Aeschylus put the skene on the Athenian stage, he also invented the stage door that made it possible for Greek tragedians to stage easy exits and entrances. Clytemnestra doesn't immediately reply to the chorus's greeting. Instead, she goes back silently into the house, shutting the door behind her, only to emerge from it once again toward the end of the choral song. Doors create the possibility, as here, of surprise. In addition, they articulate the relationship between the fictional world on stage and the further fictional world off stage. And Aeschylus takes full advantage of all that the skene door provides, highlighting both the possibilities and constraints of movement in and out of the house. "Look," Clytemnestra says, "I can come out of the house, I can go back in again, and don't you wonder what I'm doing in there." Indeed, Clytemnestra owns this door. From the moment she first emerges from it, she controls all access to the house. The threshold may only be crossed under her eye, as the messenger learns 3 times as he tries to enter the house, only to be prevented each time by Clytemnestra. But nowhere is her control over the interior-exterior dynamic expressed more clearly than in the scene in which she welcomes her husband home. Between Agamemnon's chariot and the door to the house, she has spread exotic, blood-red tapestries, tracing a crimson path into the house up to the door. Tapestries that function as a physical representation of the material wealth that the house contains, as well as an ominous foreshadowing of the family blood that soon will be shed. After Clytemnestra persuades her husband, against his better judgment, to walk upon this blood-red carpet, she follows Agamemnon through the door into the house. But Cassandra, his concubine, remains on stage, delivering dark prophecies that increase our anxiety about what awaits Agamemnon inside that house. Cassandra starts toward the house 3 times and stops. Finally, as she turns to enter, hailing its doors as the gates of Hades, she leaves only the terrified chorus on stage, anxious about what will happen inside, afraid to discover what will soon come out through the door of his house. This is the door that earlier Clytemnestra fantasized about throwing open to welcome Agamemnon, saying, "For what day could be sweeter for a wife to see than when she opens the gates to her husband, brought back safe by a god from campaign?" Once he's returned, then, this is the door she no longer needs to guard when she's gotten her husband safely inside, saying, "I can't waste time here at this door. The sheep are already standing by the central hearth, ready to be killed at its fire, a pleasure I never expected to have." This is the door that Clytemnestra has been guarding so carefully throughout this play, the door that links the external world of men and their wars with the intimate domestic interior that women stay home to keep, the door through which Agamemnon walked into his home and to his death. When the door opens at last, it makes possible the uncanny moment when the homely, as Freud would later put it, becomes unhomely, when that which ought to have been hidden comes into the light. First, it's the screams of Agamemnon who cries out, "Ah, I've been stabbed a fatal blow inside." And then it's Clytemnestra, who triumphantly appears once more on stage. This time, thanks to that stage device, the akouklema, she brings the domestic interior with her. She stands in full view of the audience with a bloody axe in one hand, towering over the twin corpses of her husband and his lover as they lie at her feet. She speaks from inside the house. "I stand where I struck by my work which is done." Aeschylus built a house on stage and put Clytemnestra in charge of its keeping. thus complicating the familiar story of Agamemnon's homecoming by first concealing and then revealing the secrets contained within the house to which he returns. Whereas in the Odyssey, Penelope's choice to stay home is associated positively with her sexual fidelity and the productive practices of caring for her husband's household, in the Agamemnon, the house contains something much more dangerous. Together with Clytemnestra, spirits of revenge and ghosts of past violence have taken up residence in this house, reframing the familiar homely qualities of Homeric housekeeping in much more destructive terms. The play defamiliarizes the comfortable notion that the best place for a woman is inside the house. And the physical house on stage, with its door that opens and shuts, materializes the thematic tensions between inside and outside upon which the play depends. Clytemnestra and her acts of violence are contained within this house until such time that they emerge through that door onto the stage. This is not the end of the story, however, and in the remaining 2 plays of the trilogy, Aeschylus continues to manipulate the imaginative infrastructure of the Skene door to move away from the cycle of maternal violence, which is contained within the house of Atreus in the Agamemnon, to a notion of civic justice that takes place out of doors in an open-air courtroom in the Eumenides. But I'm sorry, we don't have time to get into all of that. It's not even the end of the play. Indeed, Aeschylus's Agamemnon concludes not with the dramatic display of dead bodies in front of the Skene door, but rather as Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus return through that door back into the house of Atreus. In the final lines of the play, Clytemnestra dismisses the chorus and says to her lover, "You and I, as masters of this house, will dispose of all things as they should be, beautifully." And the door shuts behind them, putting an emphatic end to this chapter of the story. Indeed, theater scholar Arnold Aronson laments what he sees as a trend in contemporary theater to overlook the narrative power of the door, producing plays that don't know how to end. He says, without doors, there can be no grand exit, no finality. The societies that produced theaters with doors as major elements tended to be strong, confident societies. We're living in a time of uncertainty that produces a theater without doors. Shutting the door behind them at the end of the Agamemnon, Clytemnestra and her lover once again break new ground. Just as never before did a character enter the Athenian stage from an interior space, so too this is the first time an actor exits into that Skene house rather than striding off stage in full view of the audience. And Clytemnestra's grand exit not only underscores her attempt to control the domestic space that is contained within, but the door that closes behind her articulates a break between performer and spectator. It creates the necessary space for the Athenian audience to contemplate, to think, to try to make sense of what they've just seen. Indeed, as Zimmel observed, exactly because the door can be opened, its being shut gives a feeling of being shut out that's stronger than the feeling that emanates from a solid wall. The wall is silent, but the door speaks. In this way, the door's capacity to close is just as powerful and imaginatively productive as is its ability to open. If Toni Morrison refuses to close doors at the end of her novels, Margaret Atwood claims that happy endings are best achieved by keeping the right doors locked. And so there's been a lot of talk recently about building walls, and I'd like to say that we think a little bit more about the door. For either way, open, shut, or even when it's ajar, the door speaks, and often eloquently. It's good, as Emerson encourages us, to be an opener of doors, and yet sometimes it's also good, like Clytemnestra, to shut the front door. Thank you. And now I'm happy to present our next speaker, Angela Bahns from the Department of Psychology.
Hello, I'm Angela Bahns. I'm so happy to be part of this event. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to Pat for organizing the panel. The theme of this panel, Creating New Futures, really resonates with the goals of my program of research. My work seeks to understand how to encourage diverse friendships as a means of creating a community where our differences bring us together and make us stronger. Diverse friendships are one of the most promising strategies of prejudice reduction to come out of social psychology. The benefits of diverse friendships are well documented. In addition to reducing prejudice and stereotyping, research shows that students who have diverse friends tend to do better academically and socially as well. People who have diverse friends also tend to be more civically engaged and multiculturally competent. So while it's clear that diverse friendships are good for individuals and good for communities, the factors that facilitate their formation are not well understood. This is the focus of my program of research. The questions I ask are, what factors influence friendship choices, and how might we encourage people to befriend others who are different from them? So what do people look for in a friend? Are people seeking similarity or seeking difference? One of the most reliable findings in the interpersonal attraction literature is something called the similarity attraction effect. People like to be around others who are like them. Research shows that friends are similar in all kinds of ways, and that when people are left to do what comes naturally, what is easy, or what feels comfortable, by and large, people tend to stick with those who are like them. I've come to think of the similarity attraction effect as a psychological barrier to the formation of diverse friendships. Similarity seeking is extremely common, but there are bound to be individual differences in the preference for similarity in a friend. Other people might adopt a different goal entirely, characterized by difference seeking. It seems reasonable to expect that people who recognize the many benefits of diversity would be more interested in having diverse friends. Therefore, if we want to understand why people choose the friends that they do, it might be useful to know something about their diversity beliefs. A common question in psychology research is, how well do attitudes predict behavior? My work asks a version of this question applied to the context of diverse friendships. If we want to understand who is likely to have diverse friends, might it be meaningful to know something about their diversity beliefs? Are people who hold positive diversity beliefs more likely to have diverse friends than people who hold less positive diversity beliefs? Before we can answer this question, it's important to consider the role of the social environment. Some people might be very interested in having diverse friends and recognize the benefits that they have to offer. But if they live in a community that is small or homogeneous, they may have little opportunity to satisfy a difference-seeking goal. But contrary to what you might expect, bringing diverse people to a community does not necessarily lead to more diverse friendships. In fact, research shows that as environments become bigger and more diverse, friendships actually tend to become more similar. This finding could be described as ironic, but it does make sense if you remember the similarity attraction effect. If your goal is to find friends who are exactly like you, it becomes easier to satisfy this goal when you're placed in an environment with greater number and variety of social choices. That's why it's so important that we consider both individual preferences and goals and opportunities to satisfy those goals in trying to understand why people have diverse friends or not. Okay, so I'm going to ask you all to do a little thought experiment with me now. I'd like you to think about your closest friends. And please consider whether any of these friends you would define as diverse friends. Okay. I'm curious, how many of you would answer yes in response to this question? Can I see a show of hands? Fantastic. Now, I'm curious, as you answered this question, how many of you thought about race or another social identity dimension? Anyone? Okay, absolutely. Did anybody think about attitudes and values? Good. One thing that I've learned from my research is that the answer to the question, do diversity beliefs predict friendship choices, depends upon how you define a diverse friendship. Let me tell you more about my study. My students and I have conducted a series of field studies to examine the relationship between people's beliefs about diversity and their friendship choices. This research is currently under review for publication. My students went to public places and looked for two people who were already interacting as our measure of a friendship pair. When we asked people directly, the vast majority of people identified themselves as friends. We asked both members of the friendship pair to complete a short survey, and our survey included a measure of their diversity beliefs, as well as several different indicators of whether the two people were similar or different from one another. The advantage of this field method is that it uses a behavioral measure of friendship choice, rather than relying on self-report. As we all just discovered in the thought experiment, if you ask people, do you have diverse friends? The answer is likely to be, yes, of course I do. People will almost certainly feel there is an expected or desirable answer if you ask them directly. But it's harder to control and harder to lie about whom we happen to find you with in a public space. Our survey included a measure of diversity beliefs. This is an adapted version of a valuing diversity scale that was intentionally designed to adopt a broad definition of diversity. 12 questions asked people about their interest in getting to know people who are different from them, according to the dimensions of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, nationality, social class, age, and physical ability. We sampled 552 friendship pairs from 10 different communities. We selected these communities to represent the widest possible range of population size and racial diversity. The values in this table for racial diversity represent Simpson's Diversity Index. This is a value that's calculated from US Census data for the community samples and current college enrollment statistics for the college samples. So as you can see, the most racially diverse community included in our sample is Queens, New York, and the least racially diverse community is the town of Wellesley. And one interesting thing to point out that I'm sure resonates with many of your experiences, and you're already very aware of this, is that the student body at Wellesley College is substantially more racially diverse compared to the surrounding town of Wellesley. And this represents a significant challenge, I think, for many people in our community. Once we collected the data, I used multi-level modeling to estimate how well we could predict people's friendship choice from knowing something about their diversity beliefs and the size and diversity of the community that they were sampled from. This analysis allows me to estimate the likelihood that a given friendship pair drawn from our sample could be considered a diverse friendship. So for the purposes of this analysis, pairs were coded as diverse friends if both members of the pair gave a different response to the items on the survey asking about race or ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, nationality, or attitudes and values. And friendship pairs were coded as not diverse if both members of the pair listed the same response to each of these questions. So how well can we predict people's friendship choice from knowing something about their diversity beliefs and the size and diversity of their community? What I've learned is the answer depends on how diverse friendship is defined. Most of the research on diverse friendships looks primarily at interracial friendship. So one of the primary contributions of my study is that it adopts a broader definition of diverse friendship and looks at the answer to the question, do diversity beliefs predict friendship choices, using 5 different ways of defining a diverse friendship. I'd like to show you one example of the results from this analysis. These are the findings from the analysis looking at the likelihood that friendship pairs were racially diverse. As you can see, there was a higher likelihood that the pairs we sampled were racially diverse if the individuals scored high compared to low on our measure of valuing diversity. This is some indication that people's diversity beliefs are meaningful predictors of their friendship choices. At the same time, you can see that there's an effect for opportunity to meet people who are different, as the pairs we sampled were more likely to be racially diverse when they were drawn from a community that is high compared to low in racial diversity. So now I'm going to give you a summary of the findings, because there were 5 different models using these different ways of defining a diverse friendship. The major finding from our study is that people who say they value diversity are in fact more likely to have diverse friends, or at least they were in fact more likely to be found with someone who is different from them along one of these dimensions. This was true when we defined diverse friendships in terms of race or ethnicity, religion, and sexual orientation. But it was not true when we defined diverse friendships in terms of nationality or attitudes and values. We also found that the opportunity to meet people who are different affect the likelihood of diverse friendships. The pairs we sampled were more likely to be racially diverse or diverse in terms of nationality when we sampled them from a community that was high compared to low in racial diversity. We also found an effect for the size of the community. The pairs we sampled were more likely to be diverse in terms of religion when they were sampled from communities that were small compared to large. I want to talk more about our finding for attitudes and values, because really it's contrary to the hypothesis that diversity beliefs should predict friendship choices. We found that people who say they value diversity were actually more likely to be friends with someone who has similar attitudes and values to them. And this effect was especially pronounced in the larger communities. So one possible explanation for this finding is that when people say they value diversity, they're likely thinking about race or other social identity dimensions. And perhaps they're not thinking about diversity of thought as a dimension of diversity to be valued. The finding from our study suggests that positive diversity beliefs might serve as a marker of shared liberal attitudes. And we do have data that are consistent with this explanation. So what have we learned about how to encourage diverse friendships? I think the most promising finding from this research is that people's preferences and goals regarding diversity are related to their friendship choices. It's true that people's diversity beliefs are meaningful indicators of their behavior. This suggests that if we're trying to change behavior, a reasonable strategy is to try and change people's beliefs. And this speaks to the efficacy of educating people about the value of diversity, with a reasonable expectation that improving diversity attitudes should lead to a greater number of diverse friendships. At the same time, however, we're reminded from the findings of this research that difference-seeking goals can only be realized when there's ample opportunity to meet people who are different. So it's important to both address people's beliefs about diversity and provide meaningful opportunities to get to know those who are different from us. As one word of caution, however, it's important to know that simply bringing diverse people to a community on its own is not enough to encourage diverse friendship formation. We need to consider both factors, goals and opportunities, in order to realize this shared goal. And finally, perhaps the biggest pill to swallow is that we all need to expand our conception of diversity. It's wonderful to value diversity in terms of race and other social identity dimensions. But I would argue it's equally important to recognize the value in diversity of thought. Getting to know someone who sees the world differently from you in the context of a friendship that it's marked by trust and mutual respect has incredible potential to improve intergroup relations. So give it a try. I challenge you. Make friends with someone you disagree with. Maybe someone who has different political views than you. Maybe someone who disagrees with you about gay rights or gun control, or God forbid, even someone who might vote differently from you in the upcoming election. I'm not suggesting, now this is important, I'm not suggesting that you try and change them, or they you. But I firmly believe that embracing diversity in its many forms and forging close ties with those who are different from us is an empirically validated solution to many of the world's most pressing problems. The tricky part is, of course, that paying lip service to the value of diversity is not enough. We all need to show that we value diversity in our daily interactions with the people around us. Each one of us holds the power to help create a community where differences are valued and our differences make us stronger and bring us together. And finally, I'd like to end by acknowledging the absolutely critical contribution of the wonderful students who have worked with me on this research. Some of them are pictured here. Unfortunately, this was taken from one semester in my lab group, and many more students have contributed that are not pictured, but all the names appear. These students had input in all stages of this research project, from designing the study and creating the final questionnaire, and perhaps most impressively, collecting all of the data from over 1,000 individuals using paper and pencil surveys, out on foot with their clipboards, walking around communities in the greater Boston and New York areas. So I absolutely could not have done this work without their important contribution. So I'd like to say thank you. And now I'm pleased to present Professor Mala Radhakrishnan, Associate Professor of Chemistry.
Thank you very much. My name is Mala Radhakrishnan. I'm a professor in the chemistry department, and I'm really excited to be part of this really special event. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So I thought today I'd tell you a little bit about how I use computational modeling and physical chemistry to matchmake. So when you think about matchmaking, you think of a person whose job it is to predict whether two people are going to be compatible based on their properties and trying to figure out what are the most important things to consider in this prediction. Well, I like to matchmake molecules, and the reason why is because if we can understand what makes two molecules really attracted to each other, to really stick together, we can design drugs that can treat important diseases. And to better understand how matchmaking really works on a molecular level, we can turn to nature, because it turns out nature is a great matchmaker. Countless times every second, in every cell of your body, molecules are coming together. They're literally falling in love. I like to personify molecules. I hope that's okay, and nobody will take offense. But they really just want to be happy, just like you and me. So here's a picture of two proteins, which are essentially molecules coming together. And proteins are molecules made of atoms, just like all molecules are. And along the interface are a special pattern of particular physical and chemical properties that are perfectly matched. So how does nature do this, and why? Well, nature does it through evolution, and it does it because every molecule in your body has a particular function. So some molecules, because of their function, need to be what we call highly specific, which means they have just one true love out there, only one binding partner that's perfectly matched to them. And so you can imagine perhaps functionally a molecule whose job it is to tell one particular cell to grow or mature needs to be highly specific, because if it binds willy-nilly to all different partners, then the wrong kinds of cells could mature and divide, and that could lead to cancer. Other molecules, however, have evolved to be, and this is a technical term, promiscuous. For reasons that maybe you can understand. They actually have to bind rather closely to multiple partners. And so you might imagine a molecule whose job it is to communicate a message like, oh, there's a virus attacking, or we need to start an immune response, might need to communicate this message to lots of different partners. So nature has figured out how to use chemistry and physics to be able to tailor the binding interfaces of these molecules so that they have their desired tailored recognition profiles, so to speak. So how can we do this? How do we design matches, and why do we care? So you're all familiar with medicines. This is Lexiva, which is a pill that's put out by GlaxoSmithKline, used to treat HIV. And when I think as a chemist of a drug, I think of the active ingredient, which is shown here. This molecule is amprenavir, shown in a chemical two-dimensional representation. So how does a drug like amprenavir work? Well, as a modeler, and one good thing about being a modeler is you get to say you model for a living, which is always kind of nice. So I care about the three-dimensional structure of amprenavir. So it actually takes up space, and it has a particular shape. And it has particular chemical properties that allow it to recognize its drug target, which is here. It's called HIV protease. This is a very large protein that has so many atoms we can't show all the individual atoms. But essentially, HIV protease is a protein that the virus makes, and it essentially acts like a pair of scissors. Its job is to cut up raw materials, so to speak, so that new virus particles can be made. And so HIV needs the protease's job to be able to replicate. And you can think of amprenavir as a big wad of gum that kind of sits in between the blades of the scissors and sticks real tightly and keeps the protease from doing its job. So the tighter amprenavir can stick, the more effective of a drug it's going to be. As another example, shown here, this little itty-bitty red molecule is called efavirenz, and it binds to another protein HIV target called HIV reverse transcriptase, whose job it is to replicate the HIV genome, so HIV can, replicate, make more copies of itself. And this molecule, by sticking right in here, actually sort of puts a little kink in the structure of this huge molecule, rendering it ineffective. Okay, so these drugs work by sticking tightly to their targets and somehow altering their function, keeping them from working. So you can imagine what we care about is making these molecules bind really tightly. But what's more important is that they bind specifically, right? Because if they bind to anything in your body, that's what gives rise to side effects, right? Which we know are bad. However, it turns out that with HIV, you actually don't want your drug to be too specific. And that's because, like many disease targets, HIV mutates. And so you actually don't just have one target you're designing towards. There's multiple mutant versions of these proteins about, and if you make your drug too specific, then you'll get drug resistance. It won't be promiscuous enough. So we actually have to balance specificity and promiscuity when we match-make molecules. And so as a matchmaker, what do we have to do? Well, just like a person trying to predict whether two people are going to be compatible, we can't take everything into account when we match-make our molecules, but we have to think about what's most important. And so molecules are essentially collections of atoms that have a particular shape that we need to account for. But every atom, according to sort of simplified models, has partial positive and negative charges, okay? And we want to quantify, okay, how well will these two interact? So let's just assume as a thought experiment that there's certain charges right on the binding interface of our target that are negative. Well, we all learned that opposites attract, right, at least on a physical level. And so we might want to make our drug positively charged. And in fact, the more positive, the better, right? And if it were that easy, then I probably wouldn't have a job, because it turns out it's a lot more complicated than that. And the reason why it's so complicated is because our bodies have a lot of water in them. And water, which is H2O, so these two little spheres are hydrogen atoms, and the big one is an oxygen atom, is a very polar molecule. It has a negative end and a positive end. And so we want the drug and the target to love each other, but it turns out that if either of these are charged, water is going to really, really love both of them too. The positive ends of the water molecules will interact really favorably with the target, and shown here, the negative ends of the water molecules will interact really favorably with the drug. So in order for these two molecules to come together, they have to be able to overcome their attractions with the water. Okay, so this is like when two people come together, maybe to get married, they have to forsake their interactions with everyone else, right? So there's a trade-off here you have to make, right? Well, the molecules are doing this all the time with water. And so what that means is it turns out you can show that if you make this drug too charged, it's going to be too attractive to the water, which is bad. It's not going to want to bind to your target. But if you make the drug not charged enough, then it's not attractive enough to the target. So this is like when people say, they want their partner to be attractive but not too attractive. It's kind of that, the same thing is going on all the time on a molecular level, okay? So what this sort of says is that there's this sweet spot, right, where we can quantify, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, how you can design a drug that's optimal. So it optimally balances this trade-off between the desire to bind to the target and the desire to bind or interact favorably with water. But the point is that we cannot ignore water in our model. But there's one problem. There's a lot of water in our bodies, and it's always moving around, and it's actually really complicated to model water. So one of the large sort of side areas in my research is trying to come up with better approximate yet accurate models for water. And so we use one of those approximate models in order to find our optimal matches for molecular interactions. And so using an approximate model for water, if you've taken some chemistry, you may know that we use something called delta G, or the change in Gibbs free energy, to quantify binding. So this is sort of our quantitative measure of how attracted two molecules are to each other. Because chemists, I guess, are thinking in some opposite way, a more negative delta G means tighter or better binding. So negative energy is good. We use approximate models to generate equations that allow us to calculate delta G. And these models are based in physics, and we express them mathematically. And then we use computational algorithms in computer science to solve these equations to obtain our Gibbs free energy, so our quantitative assessment of how tightly these molecules will bind, as a function of ligand charge. And then finally, we optimize our ligand charge using calculus. So in the last few minutes, we've touched on some biology and some chemistry, some physics, some computer science, and some math. And so I hope I've convinced you, as part of thinking ahead to the future, that really being able to solve complex problems in this world requires a really interdisciplinary approach. And it's fun that way, too. You get to collaborate a lot. So just as a schematic, this shows what I've been talking about, which shows that there's sort of this optimal value of charge on our drug. Making it too charged makes our interaction with water too tight. Making it not charged enough makes our interaction with the target not strong enough. And we're interested in finding that balance. So as an example, we published a study applying this technique to a molecule that's used to treat HIV called rilpivirine. This is shown in chemical form. And you can see its three-dimensional structure here bound to HIV reverse transcriptase. What we can first do is ask the question, okay, what are the actual positive and negative charges on rilpivirine as it is right now? And so this kind of shows where you see blue, those atoms are more positive. Where you see red, those atoms are more negative. And we use quantum mechanics to determine this. And so then we can do essentially the analog of couples counseling, right? Where we say, how can we make this match better? What is it that the drug could do or be or change about itself to make it better? And we can look at a picture of what the optimal charges would be. And so if we perform this analysis, we get a visual that says, okay, well, actually, there's a lot of similarities. If you look at the patterns of reds and blues here, not so different, so that's good. But if we actually take a difference between these two, there are some regions that show suboptimality. So we can look at these parts of the molecule and say, okay, maybe we can make some chemical modifications that make them more in line with being optimal. However, if you remember, I said HIV mutates. So we optimize towards one target, but what about the other possible targets, the mutants? Well, when we optimize towards the mutant targets, we actually get a very different picture of what the optimal drug would look like. So this would be like if you're trying to be perfect for 3 different people, right? Well, that's hard to do because they might all want different things. And so you can see that here, we might suggest different changes. Here are different changes. So what do we do? So we developed a method to actually simultaneously design towards multiple targets. And in other words, design essentially a promiscuous drug. And when we apply that technique to our rilpivirine molecule, so this is what it looks like as actual charges, what's really interesting is that we actually get something that, if you can see, has essentially very little positive or negative at all. And so this is kind of like an analog in sort of human interactions. If you want to be liked by a lot of people, you tend to have to be middle of the road. You can't be too polarized in one way or another. So this is kind of interesting that molecules kind of, again, seem to behave a lot like people. We can use this strategy then going forward to try to think about sort of more subtle changes we could make to molecules to make them more in line with what we want them, how we want them to recognize molecules, other molecules. So one of the things I said is, okay, we need to consider the water, but it turns out that there's a lot more than just water and these two molecules in each cell. There is a whole bunch of other stuff. There's lots of other fish, other proteins, lipids, nucleic acids. It's really crowded in your cells. It's incredibly crowded. And how does the presence of these other molecules affect interactions? Well, as a first study, as a preliminary study that we published more recently, we said, how could we come up with a very simple model to account for just the fact that these blobs, these other things in the cell, might take away water? And so, as a first pass, we modeled them as just these big blobs, and we could systematically change the size and the density of them. And we asked, how do molecular recognition interactions, these delta Gs, how do they change? And we actually found some really interesting systematic changes. And so we were recently were awarded funding from the National Science Foundation to start to model these in more detail and start to understand exactly how, okay, if we make these more realistic and we start to actually incorporate other aspects of reality into our model, how we can understand whether our design predictions or our optimal matches might change in a crowded environment. And lastly, you probably all know that relationships can change over time, right? So the same thing happens on a molecular level. And we're interested in understanding how dynamic motions of molecules as they are bound can actually affect their nature of their interactions and how you might design an optimal match. So shown here is a molecular dynamics simulation done by a senior thesis student where she was actually simulating, this is a chronic myeloid leukemia drug, ponatinib, bound to its target. So she's simulating it over time, and she actually calculated how that optimal match might change as a function of the conformation. And so this is ongoing work that we're really excited to look at. So I hope I convinced you that molecular matchmaking is a really interesting and important problem that requires an interdisciplinary approach. And of course, none of this would be possible without my team of wonderful students. These 5 were pictured here are the ones whose work I directly presented today, but I've really, really enjoyed working with the students. So many of them have gone on to do wonderful things in science and other disciplines and have really leveraged their interdisciplinary learning experience here. And just to finish off, I really feel strongly about creative communication of science. I think there's a lot of untapped potential about intersections between science and the arts. So I wrote a book of verse. They were mainly trying to teach sort of chemical concepts through poetry, but this one poem is inspired by my research, so I thought I would read it here. It's called Drug Test. All of my atoms were quietly shaking, so nervously fearing this undertaking. But focus, I had a goal, a vision, to make it past this first audition. Millions of compounds like me were competing that day at a crucial molecular screening, but all of my fears would I have to shrug if I wanted to be the next big drug. The screening call announcement read, "We hate HIV, so let's come out ahead. Do you think you have the optimal face to inhibit an HIV protease?" My turn had come. I tumbled with care to face the protease, and there, without even needing to put up a fight, I diffused right into its active site. And soon, I saw others were rolling on by and staring me down with an envious eye, but they were unable to pry me free. I'd bound with quite negative delta G. The protease whimpered incessantly, "Oh, please," I say, "let go of me. You've brought all my work to a halt, by sitting right where all my substrates should go." I smiled. Perhaps my dreams would thrive. See, HIV needed its job to survive, but I clogged up the site with a fit rather snug. I could stop the virus, could be a drug. Soon I heard many people exclaim, "We've gotten a hit," and then came the fame. In weeks that followed, they took many actions to note my inhibiting interactions. They found that my shape, it was just about right. My molecular mass was suitably light, and the hydrogen bonds that I made were all strong, so none was electrostatically wrong. My hydroxyl group was forced to crane, so yes, there was internal strain, but overall I felt quite free to move about entropically. But just when I thought that the world I was winning, I heard, beware, this is just the beginning. There are many more tests you will have to complete, because becoming a drug is no easy feat. Your binding will need to be highly specific before they'll consider you truly terrific. Your affinity must be extremely persistent, for HIV mutates, becomes drug resistant. And sure enough, was I told with a sigh, my toxicity, it was a little too high. We really truly value your patience as we make chemical modifications. I found myself now in a mental jam. You're going to alter who I am? Was this worth hopping through painful hoops like losing my favorite functional groups? But then I remember the ultimate goal with tingles throughout my molecular soul. The millions of people with HIV, I may prolong their lives, you see. So it wasn't about my fame, my glory, but writing a happier end to their story. And that's when I felt really proud to be a part of biochemistry. Thank you. So now, thank you. So now I'd like to invite all the panelists from the first panel up for a Q&A.
So thank you so much for a wonderful speaker. I really enjoyed that, and I hope you too. And this is our opportunity to open the floor to discussion. So if you have any questions or comments or thoughts you would like to share, this is your opportunity. Join us. Your microphone is on the sides. If you can just approach the mic on the side.
Oh, I can't walk it.
Okay.
Tell me about the size of the classes and how many classes you teach a day and how do you interact with your students?
Great. How about we start there? Okay. So the question was asked about the size of the classes we teach and how many classes we teach per day, and the third, how we interact with students. Most of us generally teach 2 classes a semester, so 2 full classes, and they, depending on which department or what classes they are, they can meet anywhere from once a week to 5 days a week. I usually teach 2 3-day classes a semester, so I interact depending on the class size. If it's 6 to 10 students, we might maybe in a small little, around one single table discussion format. The largest classes I've taught had about 35, 38 students in them, and those would be more sort of tiered seating, but still I got to know everybody very individually. I meet with all students individually at the beginning of the semester, work with them one-on-one a lot. And this semester, I'm actually teaching 1 class, but that's because it's actually an integrated biology and chemistry introductory class. It's the first time that such a class has been offered on campus, and the goal is to get students into science early on and excited about the interdisciplinary nature of it.
My answers would be fairly similar to Mala's in that I had a typical semester for me is 2 classes.
We need to hear you.
Is my mic on now? No? Now? Yes. Yes, okay, great. So my typical schedule is to teach 2 classes a semester. I often teach 1 lecture course and 1 seminar. I teach social psychology and I teach introduction to psychology. I'm currently teaching research methods in psychology. The methods course is a lab-based course. We meet twice a week for 2.5 hours each meeting. I work extensively with the students in my seminar. It's capped at 15. We often have, around 12 as an average, I'd say. The research students I work with take an independent study for credit, and we meet weekly as a lab to touch base on projects, and then I delegate tasks, and they put in hours outside, of that meeting to move the research forward.
I teach 2 kinds of classes. I teach ancient Greek, so those classes will range, those tend to be smaller. I currently have 7 students in beginning Greek. Those classes meet 4 times a week, early in the morning. There's lots of, it may no longer be a spoken language, but there's lots of back and forth. They're wonderful classes because everybody starts off at 0 and you know a lot of ancient Greek, you know all of ancient Greek, all the grammar by the end of the first year. So they're very interactive and lots of participation. I also teach courses where the reading is in English. A course on the theme of travel and literature, a course on mythology, and those courses tend to be larger. But even the larger courses in which I might talk more still incorporate a lot of discussion from students.
So I teach computer science core courses in computer science, but I also teach courses in my discipline of research in human-computer interaction that serve as core courses from our media art and sciences program. And when I teach my courses in human-computer interaction, which is human-computer interaction and tangible user interfaces, I actually teach them in my research lab. So there is this integration of research activities and teaching activities happening in the same space, taking advantage of the same equipment, and I try to expose students to my research activities as much as I can. Sometimes the training of the students become the pipeline to join the research program. Sometimes the students are participants in studies of kind of evaluating new technologies that we're using in the lab. Sometimes they learn how to program and use this technology and then become users of that technology. So there is this fluid interaction between the research and the teaching. And I also like to think about our summer research program as a real teaching opportunity. It's a different kind of teaching because teaching is informal, students are working in the lab. But I think this is the time where a lot of knowledge is transferred among the students with my very informal interaction with the students over the summer with visitors that are coming. So I think that our research program is also a wonderful training and teaching opportunity. Do we have any more questions?
Thank you for your, is this mic on? Yes, okay. Thank you for your work and your presentations. You sort of answered my question a little bit, but I'm struck by, I mean, the quality and just the production, the amount of production you've been able to do teaching at a place like this where we know students demand so much of our attention as faculty. And I'm wondering if you could share things that you think Wellesley has done especially well to support your career as researchers. It seems like the student piece is one key piece of it, but we might imagine others, like funding for travel or making sure that you have connections to other colleagues at other universities or whatever departmental sort of mechanics or politics have enabled you to be successful with this part of your career here. Thanks.
I can start. You want to start?
I was really lucky to be the director of the Newhouse Center for Humanities for 6 years, which gave me an incredible opportunity to spend time with not only with scholars who were on campus visiting to do their research, also visiting authors, and we brought a lot of artists and put together a lot of collaborative programming. And I think the Humanities Center has been a great opportunity to not to bring students and faculty together, but also to give faculty, provide for them the opportunities to connect with people who colleagues they may not have at the college, at a small college, who are more connected to their own particular research. As a result of a lot of the programming we did there, it really kind of kickstarts keeps your intellectual life going. So I think that was one particular resource that the college that was really useful for me. I think teaching in lots of different being asked to teach all across at least the classical world gives me the impetus to do things a little bit differently. That also kicks off research as well.
I would say, the summer research program is just really a huge, wonderful thing. Just having students that are engaged full-time in research. And that a lot of times conferences, we can take them to conferences and they can present at conferences over the summer. It's just wonderful. And I also would like to highlight the seminar programs that we have going on in the Science Center. So chemistry, for example, holds weekly seminars, and organizing those and then going and visiting other colleges for their seminar programs, really a great way to sort of bounce ideas off. And even within Wellesley, one thing I love about the Science Center is, because Wellesley is small enough, you get to really hear people from different fields, and you get to hear about what they do. And one of my whole research collaboration started because I happened to sit in on a math department seminar one week, and that has turned out to be a wonderful collaboration. And we just submitted a paper about the results of our work. So being able to kind of leverage the fact that there are people that do very different things and see connections is something that is wonderful about the seminar program and a small college. So.
For me, also the summer research program is absolutely critical to me being able to do my work, particularly using a field method. It's very labor intensive, and I ask my students to spend long hours out there looking for people willing to participate in our research. And during the academic year, they're only able to devote maybe 10 hours a week, and having them supported by the college to stay on campus and put in 40-hour weeks toward the lab's research goals is absolutely fundamental. And the second thing I would say is that within my department, the option to teach a seminar in my specialty area of research, so I teach a seminar on the prejudice of psychology and discrimination, it really allows me to make these intersections between teaching and research and to stay at the forefront of my field, and an immediate payoff to being familiar with the latest papers coming out and constantly updating my reading list for the seminar has really contributed to my scholarship, I would say.
For me, beyond the science summer program, which is really instrumental for doing research, and I said for teaching and engaging them, there is also the liberal arts background of the students. My research is very interdisciplinary, and a lot of time it's the students that come and make connections across disciplines and introduce me to their professor in education, introduce me to a method that they learn in the psychology course, and bring these ideas and connections together. So my recent training, my PhD program, is obviously very specific, and the liberal arts background of the students, it's what kind of keep me connected to the other disciplines. So I think that's instrumental. And of course, there are also the administrative support. So the fact that there is financial support for students to travel to conferences. Travel is a huge motivator for students, and they very proudly and deservedly so present their research. And a lot of time they happen to be the only undergraduate student that get to present work in a conference. And the support that the college helped me with internal funding until I was kind of able to stand on my legs and kind of apply for external funding that were successful because the internal funding really provided enough basis to create a research program.
Great. So my question actually builds quite naturally off of that because as someone who designed an interdisciplinary major of my own, I'm aware of the various pulls to your department, to your own research, et cetera, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more. I've heard a couple glimmers about the ways in which the college is creating the spaces for you to make those interdisciplinary encounters happen both among faculty and for the students. And then I have a very specific science question because I have a son who's double majoring in math and biochemical engineering, and he talks about proteases all the time. So I'm curious, if you make something that blocks a protease for HIV, how do you keep it from interfering with the proteases that your own body needs to have functioning so that you don't get sick? So a very specific and a very broad.
I mean, I can answer the specific and maybe touch on the broad as well, but yes, so that's actually a big issue, and there are actually some small structural differences. People study, so pepsin is sort of like the canonical protease in people's guts, right, that's required for digesting, and a lot of the protease inhibitors do interact with pepsin. So it's looking at this, what makes pepsin different from HIV protease, and you have to look on a structural molecular level, and that's where the biochemistry and the computational modeling really comes into play. So, but it's an excellent question, so it's that idea of specificity, yeah. And getting to your first question, so one of this interdisciplinary course that I'm teaching this semester is part of the Team Teaching Initiative, which is one of the goals was to bring people from different disciplines together to teach courses, and there's been some really cool connections that have been made, both sort of across campus, so between humanities and the sciences, but also sort of in our case it's within the sciences. But it's really great because you can bring together different perspectives within the same classroom and make those connections really explicit. And so that's one way that I think in this particular case faculty and students can kind of experience sort of an interdisciplinary learning environment.
We have time for one more question, and then
we're all invited to go outside to a break, and we're all going to be available during the break and would love to continue and interact and continue this discussion outside.
I think it was my turn. So I have a question as an alumna. What about us? And I know that there's a one-word answer, which is money, but I'm hoping for some other ones. It's so exciting to come back to Wellesley. And when I was applying to Wellesley and trying to make a decision, my mom said, you know, Wellesley will stay a part of your life forever. And I think many alumna, as the ones here, can say it really does. But what is often harder is to think about how we can help the students at Wellesley or the faculty at Wellesley with what they're doing, which is so exciting. If there are ways beyond symposiums that would help you in your research and help the students in their education, for the alumni, for this rich alumni body to be a part of their Wellesley experience. Do you have suggestions or things that you have often wished were there from the alumni network to help you and your students in terms of just reaching out to the broader industry or the broader research community that's available to you? I know it's a loaded question.
That's a great question, and I think that engaging alums is really important for what we do, not only in research but also in teaching. And my own interaction with alums is really diverse. First, I have alums that are working in my research lab. Second, I owe my research lab the physical structure to a very generous support from Amy Batchelor and her husband. So alums are still engaged, and we're still in close contact, updating them how they use this wonderful space. But also serving as mentors for research, mentors for engaging students for future career, for graduate programs. And staying in touch. We love when there are opportunities to collaborate with alums, either if it's kind of professionally, alums that are faculty in other places and we get to work together, alums that are graduating from programs and coming back to work at Wellesley as postdocs and stay here for a little while and bring different perspectives.
I would just add to use your influence to spread the word among young people who are thinking of coming to college, to sort of speak to your experience at a liberal arts college, and particularly to the value of a liberal arts degree at a time now when students are so desperately worried about being successful and getting jobs, to remind them that this is an incredible opportunity for years where you can sample classes and approaches and thinking from all across the curriculum, and particularly to put a plea in for the humanities and for developing the kinds of critical skills and appreciation of the past and of arts and literature and a broad view, and to say that this is a real time to kind of soak that up. And I think the perspective that alumni have of having gone on to the world and maybe thinking back on those kinds of classes, or maybe a time that was less career-oriented, would be a useful corrective to give to young women who are thinking of coming to college.
Great. So we're going to stop here and go into a break together. And we would love to hear more from you, so come talk to us.